Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Michael Negrone, a fellow at the Groundwork Collaborative and a former special assistant to the president for economic policy in the Biden administration, to discuss the Trump administration's tariff policy. Helen Lawhead, the chief financial officer of Philadelphia City Council, will provide a budget 101 overview for us. Vanessa Maria Graber will report on the hands-off protests that occurred over the weekend, and Lance Haver will provide an update on the impending water rate hike. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. I just want to preface our interview here with Michael Negrone because as of, I guess, about 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock this afternoon, most of the tariffs were lifted.
Or actually, they were paused
Yes.
for 90 days, which means in 90 days, we could be revisiting this all over again.
My favorite part of this whole thing is the trade advisor to the president was in a congressional hearing. And when this happened, they asked him, did you know about this? And he had to pretend like he did. And it's the same way I act when my wife says something like, did you know Owen ate this candy? Well, yes. It was fantastic because they have no idea what they're doing. None of the rationale for why they put the tariffs in the first place now result in them lifting the tariffs. None of it adds up, except for the fact that they realized the bond market was falling apart as well as the stock market, which means if you let that happen, we go into a Great Depression. That's the only thing I can think of. I'm no economist. But this guy is. Michael Negrone spoke to us about this tariff policy. And again, we might be back in this in a few weeks or a couple months. So I think all this information is really relevant. So here is our interview with Michael Negrone, if I can open it. Okay. It doesn't look like I can. Something went wrong here. Oh, there it is. All right. Michael Negrone is a fellow at the Groundwork Collective, and you were most recently a special assistant to the president for economic policy at the National Economic Council. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
We really do appreciate it. And the first thing we're going to talk about tariffs, but the first thing I'd like to do is discuss what are tariffs, because there's a lot going on right now, and people might not have a clear idea of what this is. Can you fill us in on that?
Yes, happy to. Tariffs are a tax. They're a tax that are levied at the point of entry. So that picture a port where a shipment of toys are coming in, or a shipment of iPhones or TVs, whether it's a port for ships or aerial travel, whatever it is. And Custom and Border Patrol, there's a requirement that the importer then pays a tax, whatever it's at, whatever the tariff is at, to CBP. And that's essentially a tariff. And so when we have all this discussion about what the tariffs are going to be, and the president wants to impose more tariffs, the president's talking about a tax increase that importers will pay. And while they may not 100% go to consumers, they will go to consumers. It could be that the tariffs drive the importer to go to the producer in the other country and say, hey, I'm getting slammed with these tariffs. Could I get a little bit of a discount, or could we split them, or what have you? And so some of that could happen. But historically and inevitably, the folks here in the United States end up paying the price in some way, shape, or form. And it's not just consumers, it's businesses too.
So I am not an economist, but I do try to follow budget and national economics as much as possible. Correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but it seems to me when we look at tariffs, it's a 19th century tool we're using in a 21st century global economy, where at one point this may have made sense, but now we're seeing it be detrimental to the American and global economy. Is that correct? And what are we really talking about when we apply this broadly across the globe?
Yes. Well, look, I think tariffs can be a tool. So it is true that the origins of tariffs are more earlier in the 19th century. Tariffs have been with us for a long time, but they can be a tool when they're used in a targeted way to help domestic industries, give them room to grow. One example I can give you is in the Biden administration, the president imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese-built electric vehicles. And the reason that the administration did this was that was paired with investments to support the domestic production of electric vehicles, including incentives for buyers in the Inflation Reduction Act. There's incentives where you can get cash on the hood when you go buy an electric vehicle. And so that helped prompt essentially a doubling of sales in electric vehicles between 2022 and 2024. And so that's an example of tariffs as part of a broader industrial policy where our president says, we want strong domestic markets in X and Y industries. We're going to use tariffs in these cases to help protect those industries, to give companies room to grow. That is a legitimate use of tariffs. People can debate them, right? And I think there's always room to debate as to whether that's the best tool. Maybe it should just be incentives rather than no tariffs. Like, people can debate them, and they've been debating them for a while. I think the reason you're seeing such a shocked reaction to the policies that the president not only announced last week, but has been talking about for quite some time. Today, we're watching the last 3 days. We've seen just a massive tumble in the stock markets. We entered bear market territory this morning. Bear market is when a market declines by 20% from a peak. The S&P, the Standard & Poor 500, entered bear market territory this morning before rebounding a little bit. And so the reason you're seeing that is that what the president is talking about here is universal tariffs, tariffs on everything. And in fact, that's what he announced last week, a 10% tariff on every country, on every product coming in, with the exception of Canada and Mexico, which he had announced a different set of tariffs for them earlier. And then these country by country tariffs, some as high as 50%. And so that is scaring a lot of people, scaring a lot of people in the business community. Of course, consumers have been hearing a lot about it over the last few months. And so we've had surveys of consumers by the University of Michigan, by the Conference Board, were showing that people are expecting, consumers have been expecting inflation to go up over the coming year. They're expressing more pessimism about the U.S. economy, and the reasons that they're giving is U.S. trade policy. And who would have thought that people would be citing tariffs when they're talking about the economy? That just shows how much all of this talk has really started to penetrate the discourse. People are just hearing about it and thinking about it, and so they're getting anxious.
How likely is it that these tariffs actually bring manufacturing back to the United States?
Well, I think there's two sides. It's a double-edged sword. There are likely going to be situations where it can boost domestic production, where companies decide they want to have, rather than deal with the tariffs over the long term, they're going to do more manufacturing here. The problem with it is that it takes years to open a factory, to hire employees, to make changes in your investments. If you've got a production facility in one country and you want to bring it back, that takes some time. So in order for the tariffs to have that effect, you have to have them in place for years. And so what that means is that the impact on inflation on prices, in order for us to deliver on that strategy, you have to strap in for heightened prices for years. And so I think that's one of the core challenges of what the president has been doing here. And that's for those places where it applies. These tariffs are in place on goods where we'll never have a domestic alternative. Colombia was hit with a tariff, and we have a trade deficit with Colombia. The primary product that we're talking about is coffee. We are unlikely to grow coffee in the United States at a level where we're not going to want to buy from Colombia. Or Madagascar got hit with, I think, a more than 40% tariff. And the main product that they provide to us is vanilla. And so I don't know that we're going to be able to substitute products like that And so that's the challenge with such a blunt and across the board application of tariffs. Like if it's really about strengthening domestic manufacturing, then it should be a lot more targeted than it is. And when you do it across the board, you're raising prices for everybody. And if the goal is to bring back domestic manufacturing, you're talking about years of elevated inflation. And I don't think people thought they were signing up for that. The president said he was going to reduce prices on day one, and here we are, day 80, and he just announced the biggest tax increase in American history. And these tariffs could be in place for quite some time.
Can you explain the concept of trade deficit and why that is or is not as significant as people are making it out to be?
Yeah, so trade deficit is really just the balance between what you sell to what we sell to another country and what we take back. And so there are going to be times when I just gave a couple of examples where we have trade deficits with countries where they have a product that we are unlikely to substitute ourselves. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think, and I think economists generally have this view that trade deficits in and of themselves are not a bad thing. But there are places where trade deficits can be harmful, particularly when they impact domestic jobs, domestic production. And so we've seen over the course of decades, there are types of manufacturing that has left the United States and have gone overseas. And so trade deficits are certainly something that should be monitored and action can be taken. The trade deficit with China, for example, it was at about 300 billion in the most recent year. And that's out of a total market of about 400 billion in terms of trade that we do with China. And so that's a very significant trade deficit. Consumers benefit in many ways because oftentimes the prices are lower, but at the same time, and I think as we discovered over the course of the pandemic, is that if you are reliant on foreign countries for critical supplies, when we were in a moment during the pandemic when supply chains really got held up because there was too much demand and not enough supply, and we as a country were at the mercy of the fact that a lot of important products, minerals that go into lithium batteries, the chips that power the semiconductor chips that power everything from cars to computers, that they were in short supply, and we are heavily dependent on foreign countries for that. And so trade deficits are an important thing for policymakers to think about. They are not the be all and end all of economic policymaking. To have an entire destructive policy like this developed about just to try to address trade deficits is not the right course of action. And I think that's one of the reasons you're finding so many economists out there and business leaders just very concerned about the approach that the president is currently taking.
So what does this tariff policy specifically mean for big cities like Philadelphia?
Well, I think people in Philadelphia will see this in a number of ways. And I think the best way to think about it, the simplest way to think about it is consumers will get hit and businesses will get hit. Consumers will get hit because the prices of the goods that they pay will go up. And for the 60% of Americans who have some kind of stock ownership, if the decline in the stock market that we're watching and that has been taking place not only over the last 3 days, but really since the president started talking about tariffs, that's going to hit people's retirements, their 401ks, their other forms of IRAs, other forms of investment. And so I think consumers will get hit twice in that way. And then businesses are not only hurt by the fact that in many cases, the products that they sell are exported from these countries. Think of an Italian restaurant that sells a lot of Italian wine and other forms of liquor. And the United States has threatened a 200% tariff on European wine and liquor because they responded to the aluminum and steel tariffs that the United States put into effect. And so businesses will get hit by the fact that they have to pay more for the things that they export, that they import. But then there are American businesses, there are Pennsylvania businesses that sell into foreign markets. And so many countries will take retaliatory actions. For example, the European Union, in response to the steel and aluminum tariffs, have threatened a 25% tariff on American-made whiskey. And so just think what effect does that have for Jacquins or other domestic produced whiskeys trying to sell into European markets? And so you're looking at two types of hits for businesses as well.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Home Monitor.
Yes,
Denise.
thank you for joining us, Mr. Negron. We really appreciate it. Now, I'm listening to what you're saying as a baker who enjoys like vanilla, because I use that to bake, and who is also a descendant of natives of Kentucky, which is directly impacted by this whole tariff on whiskey. A lot of the businesses that moved their production overseas did so because they saw a cheaper workforce. They saw people that they could basically pay $2 or $3 an hour to do the same work that American workers would unionize and demand $25 an hour for. In terms of those businesses coming back to the United States and having to pay United States wages to do what they do you see that happening? Because this was what President Trump swore he was going to do in his first term, and it didn't really happen.
Right. Well, I think that's the key question, right? Is this the president has long held the view, going back to the 1980s. There are interviews of him from 40 years ago talking about tariffs. So this is something that he really believes in, and there just isn't really the evidence to show that when done in such a broad way that we will experience the return to our shores of all types of products. There are just some types of products that may never be built here because they're cost prohibitive in terms of wages. Clothing might be something that never makes sense, that companies will never find it makes sense to make here in the United States, at least at the scale. Think about like the types of when every 9 months we're buying new stuff for my kids, and we're going to Walmart or Target for those items. We're not going to fancy brand name clothing retailers, and so 97% of clothing is made overseas. Is that going to be reshored? Probably not. There are certain types of manufacturing in the auto supply chain that could be reshored because, as things stand now, more than half of the vehicles that are bought in the United States are made in North America. They're made in either the U.S., Canada, or Mexico. And those components, some of these components in the vehicles, the final vehicle might be built in the United States, but there'll be components that cross the border as much as 8 times before going into the final product. And so you see a lot more integration in North America within auto supply chains. And so you could see I could envision some changes there because it's less of a departure. But in order to get there, you have to have years of these tariffs in order for those investments to pay off. So I think it's a hard to me it's a hard sell to make that we could see the wholesale return of all of these industries to the United States. I've seen reports, just to give on another product example, that the cost of iPhones, that if an iPhone was entirely produced in the United States, it would cost thousands of dollars more than it costs now, when you factor in labor costs and regulatory costs and other things. And so that's just, I think, the risk of what the president is doing here is that are we going to, we just went through 2 years of elevated inflation. And as this president came into office, prices were starting to come down to the 2% annual inflation rate that the Federal Reserve has historically aimed for. And he just announced a slate of policies that are going to drive that up. And we could be in store for these prices for quite some time. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, the Federal Reserve, and this was pre the announcement, but the president had done enough teasing that it was out in the bloodstream. But the Federal Reserve provided an economic outlook and essentially said, we are anticipating some stagflation, which is what is the term that you use when you have an economy that is slowing down or even shrinking. but inflation is going up. And that's something that this country hasn't seen since the 1970s. And so that's one of the scariest parts about what the president is doing. And then the fact that the language he uses suggests that we're in for the long haul on this. And the payoff is as your question got at, the payoff may not be there in terms of domestic manufacturing because some of these products just won't be cost effective to make here.
Now, what I'm noticing is a bit of a tariff war around the world. We have managed to elect the only person I have ever met in my entire life that pissed off Canadians. You don't understand how hard you have to work to do that. I have Canadians in my family, so I know. I guess how does the United States recover from this tariff war once either Congress changes hands in 2026 or the presidency changes hands in 2028? How would America, go back to its trading partners and say, this tariff brain fart we had is over, let's talk about how we can work together again?
Well, I think it'll be hard work. I think that, as you note, the language that the Canadian leadership is using is very strident, and a lot of, in fact, a lot of countries that we have been most closely allied with. And it's not just about the tariffs in that sense, by the way. Like a lot of the European countries are concerned about the president's statements about Europe itself, about NATO, about the conflict in Ukraine. And so when you look at the administration as a whole, a lot of our closest allies are worried about whether they can count on us anymore. And that may be something that outlives this administration because I think in 2020, when President Biden came in, more people had viewed the Trump presidency as an aberration. But now he's back. And not only is he back, but he's more aggressive than ever. And so I do think it's going to be an uphill battle. I think on the economic front, there's sort of seeds of optimism in that in his first round of tariffs, it got escalated. Just to stick with the whiskey example, we entered into a period of retaliatory tariffs where the Europeans put tariffs on American whiskey, and American exports of whiskey fell 20% from 2018 to 2019. But ultimately, with the change in administration, those tariffs fell. And so there was some return to free trade. But I think this is so sweeping and so broad that I think it will be more of an uphill battle if either this administration comes to its senses or the president is stopped by the Congress, or if it's the job of the next president to clean this up. I do think they will have a harder the incoming, whoever the next president is, will have a harder time convincing the rest of the world that this isn't just going to be something that every 4 years the next set of Trump-aligned Republicans aren't going to just try to do this again. So I think your concern is a very valid one, and I share it.
Now, you have, like I said, right now we're in the middle of like tariff wars, and you have people in the American public who looked at the same presidential campaign that I covered during 2024 and heard all of this coming out of President Trump's mouth and are still shocked by it. Do you think that that's because Americans don't know as much about how tariffs work? Then, like, I'm old, so I was around in the 70s and I saw like the gas lines and different things. So I kind of knew how they work. But if you've never experienced that, do you think that folks thought that it wouldn't be as bad as it's going to be? And for a second question, the president said in an article in the Daily Beast that basically Americans need to take their medicine when it comes to particularly the stock market. Do you think that the people who are surprised by how all of this has turned out should be, because they should have been maybe paying a little attention to what he was saying?
Well, I think that's a great and important question for our time. And I think not to psychoanalyze substantial segments of the American public, but I think we had two competing sets of pictures in the minds of voters. First was what the words that the president was using. He was, in fact, on the campaign trail, which his team will say now, talking about tariffs and talking about how tariffs are the most beautiful word in the English language is the tariff. And so he gave ample, if looking at just his words, he gave ample evidence to show that this was something he was committed to. But at the same time, people remembered in the first administration the amount of bluster by the president and how he often appeared to say very aggressive things, very, very big things, make very big statements, and then back off or change course. And people remembered the economy of the first couple years pre-COVID as being a positive memory. And so I think what you had is a lot of people sort of banking on the fact that since the economy, their memories of the economy were positive, and that they know Trump is a big talker who doesn't always deliver exactly what he says, but they felt that they wanted a return to the economy, that I think they just a lot of people actively discounted the parts of it that were questionable, the parts of his agenda that were questionable, because they thought, well, he's just saying something and he'll back off. And you can still see a lot of that belief now amongst the American people, amongst businesses, where there's this view that, well, he's doing this, but he's going to cut a bunch of deals. And I think that gets to the fundamental schizophrenic nature of the way that this administration talks about tariffs. Is it just a tool to get Mexico to crack down on fentanyl, to get the European Union to buy more American cars, and so on and so forth down the line? Or is he trying to bring a bunch of manufacturing home and change the terms of trade with all these countries for the long term? Because you can't do both. If it's the former, then they may get some agreements, and 7 months from now, we're not looking at these tariffs. If it's the latter, you're talking about years. You're talking about years. And so I think the American people, I think many of the people who voted for the president wanted to believe the best because they had good memories pre-pandemic, and they thought he would bring it back. And they thought, well, he's just a big talker, so let's just see what happens. And hopefully he'll just grow the economy the way we remember him doing in his first term. And right now, that's not a great bet, but we'll see if cooler heads prevail over in the Trump administration.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, our co-host, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Well, Mr. Negron, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people learn more about your work?
You can follow me on X at mnegron01, where I often post about the economy. And you can also go to the Groundwork Collaborative website to not only look at what I'm working on, but we have a host of other scholars and experts who are talking about and commenting on the economy at this moment where there's so much uncertainty and so much happening. It's a good place to go to just to see to get a perspective on what's taking place.
One of the best parts of this job is to get to talk to people like you who know what's going on. So thank you so much, and please come back and join us again sometime.
We'd be happy to. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we would like to thank Mr. Negron for joining us on the program. Great insight there. Now, we recorded this interview on Monday, so things have changed since then, but I think a lot of this is still apropos considering who's in the White House. Our next interview is with the City Council's Chief Financial Officer, Helen Lawhead. This is our first Budget 101. Next week, we'll have City Budget Director Sabrina Maynard on to provide the view from the mayor's office. So here is the view of the budget from City Council. All right. Well, Helen, thank you so much for joining us. And the first thing we'd like to talk about, we're talking about budget right now. Budget, I think, is the lifeblood of everything that happens in the city. So just, if you briefly can, explain to us what the budget is and kind of how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great to be here with you today. So the budget for the city of Philadelphia really is its annual plan of how it chooses to spend its money on the programs and services that our residents really count on. And then it also incorporates what we expect to receive in revenues. So our tax dollars, fines and fees, what we're projecting to receive each year, and then how we're expecting to spend that. And we know that how the city chooses to allocate its resources really does have serious impacts on our businesses, our residents, and visitors to the city. And so when we talk about our budget, we usually talk about the two main types. Our operating budget, which funds our day-to-day services, like our library centers, L&I. It also funds our salaries and our benefits for personnel. And then we have our capital budget, which funds our large infrastructure investments. And for that, we often think about purchasing trash trucks or our fire engines, or building recreation centers or fire engine centers as well. And so those are really the two main types of budgets that we talk about and get the most attention during the budget process.
And this year, the operating budget is about 6.7 billion.
Yes.
And the capital budget is closer. It's a little more this year than it usually is.
Yeah, so the capital budget, this is the largest new borrowing that they're proposing to do. And so they're proposing to borrow $337.2 million. And when you combine that with prior year borrowings, the total budget is $7.2 billion for this upcoming fiscal year for the capital budget.
And just as a brief aside, when people hear borrowing, sometimes I don't know that they exactly understand what that means. In this context, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so just like you might do in your own personal life, you may take out a loan for your house or for a car because you don't have the cash on hand to be able to make that really large purchase. So you'll borrow some funds to be able to do that. But that means that over time you do have to pay off that borrowing just like you do for your mortgage or your car payment. And so the city does something similar with our capital budget. So that way we can make these really large investments and be able to do that each year without having to go down into our cash reserves. And that's just a more financially responsible way to do it.
So where does all this money come from?
Yes. So when we are talking about our general fund, which is the one that we hear about the most, where we have the most discretion over spending, the largest portion of that comes from local tax dollars. And the largest portion of our tax dollars comes from our wage and earnings tax. And that's paid by both residents and non-residents. So folks that live outside the city and that work in the city, they also pay that tax. So that's the largest portion. But we also get taxes from our businesses, our property tax, and a whole host of other taxes. But those three are really our big three ones.
So do you all also get like grants and different things, not just from the federal government, which we'll get into in a moment, but also the state government? Do you get state grants, and are they like consistent enough that you can figure them into the budget right off the top?
Yes. Yeah. So we get a really large amount of funding from other governments like the federal and state government. And most of the time that is funding, the largest portion goes towards our health and human services departments. So our public health department, our Department of Human Services, the Department of Behavioral Health, those get the largest amount of funding from other governments. And so each year that is pretty steady. We really know what that is going to look like each year. But then in addition to that, we do get other grants from the governments throughout the year. I think one that's been in the news lately is around the tree plan for Philly. So that's an example. We've also received a whole host of other grants. The bipartisan infrastructure law that the city received to help fund some of our infrastructure was another really big pot of money we received from the federal government.
Now, can you talk a little bit about the difference between how the tax thing breaks down? What part goes to the city government? What part goes to the school district, and why?
Yeah, so the one that we'll probably talk about the most is our property tax. And so the city collects our property tax. A portion of that goes to the school district to help fund their services, and then we keep a portion ourselves. Over the years, we've adjusted what that portion looks like. Last year's budget included an increase in that portion that goes to the school district. But there's other taxes that go directly to the school district. The use and occupancy tax goes directly to the school district. Our liquor tax goes directly to the school district. So when you're having a drink out at the bar, that's helping our schools. And then there's some other fines and fees, like our on-street parking goes to our school district. And so there are some different ones that go directly to the school district, others we split. But the city collects all those taxes on behalf of the school district and then remits them to them.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about millage? Now, if you're like a longtime budget geek, like I've been over the years, I kind of understand what millage is, but could you talk a little bit about millage and why it's important to this process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really the portion that's going to be the tax that's applied to residents, and then the split that goes between the city and the school district. And so each year it can be adjusted. Oftentimes it isn't, but it is something that can be legislated each year.
So when you are looking at this, now we're talking $6.7 billion, at least that much for the capital budget. All the other things we're talking about, how do you keep this straight? How do you get all these numbers in line and make this document?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say one aspect about Philadelphia's budget that is maybe different from some other budgeting is that Philadelphia does incremental budgeting each year, so they adjust up and down from the budget from the prior year. And so sometimes that's helpful to be able to really identify maybe what that new spending is each year, or if there are cuts, to identify what that difference is. And so oftentimes that's where we start, is really looking at that new proposed spending as we do our analysis to really see what proposed changes there are. And then we can dig into each department and look at what we call their base budget. So the budget that doesn't change too much each year and that continues some of the existing services. But throughout the budget hearing process, we have our hearings with each department. And that's how we kind of separate and go through each department one by one and analyze each budget itself and really identify areas that are different from last year, or areas that we think maybe should be different that they have not proposed yet to be different. And so that's the approach we tend to take, is taking it one department at a time and also looking at all the different funds within each department.
How long does that take?
Well, during the budget process, we don't have a ton of time to do that, being on this side of things. So we get the budget proposal in March, and the budget has to be adopted by June. So it's really only a couple months that we have to do this. However, throughout the year, what myself and my team do is look at the existing budget and do analysis on that existing budget. So when we get the new one, we already have some of this background analysis done to help us, because we do know it's a really short period of time. And all the council member offices are doing the same thing with their staff. They're divvying up, trying to figure out the best way to attack it. But it is a short period of time. I won't deny that. It's a lot of work for each office and for council staff.
Now, does the budget start to change in real time? I know that there are things that the administration has proposed as part of the $6.7 million, but there are things that are also councilmanic priorities, and those things must be addressed. I guess, does this happen, and what happens with you when council is doing, those things? Well, no, I want to add more here, or I want to take away more here, or I want to create this instead of that. I guess, how does this work out for you? I mean, are you sitting there at your desk saying, please don't do this?
Yeah, so we get a lot of requests from council members and a lot of proposals of what they'd like to see change in the budget. And really my role is to work in partnership with the council president and the council members to go through all those proposals, go through those requests, to vet them and to help them really kind of dig into those proposals and make sure that they are they've gone through the numbers, they're fiscally sound. And then ultimately we prioritize those and we negotiate with the administration on what ultimately will end up in the budget. And that process usually takes a couple weeks of going back and forth, kind of sharing initial proposals, getting feedback, going back to council members again, getting their feedback. So it's a really iterative process, and then ultimately concludes with the final agreement between city council and the administration on what ends up in the final budget.
Now, this is part of a 5-year plan, and every time there's a new budget, the 5-year plan changes. Can you talk a little bit about A, why Philadelphia has a 5-year plan, and B, how do the changes in each budget year affect that plan? Does it make it more expensive? Does it make it less expensive? How does each budget impact that plan?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, having a 5-year plan is really helpful for the city to make sure that we are staying fiscally responsible and maintaining our fiscal health. Because we don't want to make decisions this year that will put Philadelphians 5 years from now at risk of not having that same level of service. But the reason we do a 5-year plan is because of PICA, the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority. It was established back in the 90s when the city was doing some irresponsible budgeting tactics. And so PICA was established as our oversight committee to make sure that the city is able to maintain its fiscal stability. So each year, it's actually PICA that approves the 5-year plan. Council actually doesn't approve the 5-year plan. And so when we make a change to this year's budget, it certainly has impacts on that plan. And so that's part of our negotiating as well. When we are proposing an item, oftentimes we think about, is this a cost for 1 year, or is this a program that we want to continue over the course of the 5-year plan? And what does that cost? And how does that impact our budget over that course of time? And so that's always a discussion that we have internally with the administration. And then also, I also do check in bi-weekly with Marissa Waxman, the executive director of PICA, to make sure we're staying up to date on the concerns that PICA has for the city's fiscal stability.
Now, when it comes to you have a lot of borrowing and you have a lot of grants. And one of the things that they always tell you when you get a grant is to not create a new program with it, because you're not guaranteed to get that grant again.
Yes.
When you sit down and you talk with the council members and the administration about these different things that they may want to try that may be grant-based, do you tell them that? Because sometimes, I know with the school district, there have been occasions where they have used a grant to create a program, and then once the grant ended, the program goes away, but the parents and the people who used it still want it.
Yes, I think thinking about the long-term stability of a program is definitely key. It's something I discuss with council members and the council president and other staff when we are proposing new programs of, if this funding were to go away, what other funding could take its place? Or thinking long-term, is this something the city does want to fund for long-term, or is this something we're hoping we could pilot and then have other funding sources eventually step in to cover it? And so I think that's always a discussion, and it's definitely key to making sure that we are being fiscally responsible, and that we're not pulling away programs that are really valuable to people because we haven't thought of what's next once that funding goes away.
So how much of the budget is kind of already decided by the time you get started?
So that's a good question. So I would say, again, a lot of the budget is its base budget. So it's a budget that each department has from the prior year, and they're really adjusting up and down. But council can change any of the appropriations for each department. However, I will add that the city budgets by class, which means we have class 100, 200, and those are assigned to certain types of services. So class 100 is dedicated to personnel, class 200 is dedicated to purchasing services, so that's like contracts, and that's what's actually in the legislation, and so that's what council can legislate between those items. And so if the administration wants to move around within those classes, so if they want to move certain funding, they can do that without coming back to get reappropriations from council. So they do have a little bit of leverage to do that. But council, again, can go in and tweak any part of the budget that they would like to. I think you've probably seen historically they tend not to do really drastic changes. It really is around some of these key priorities that their constituents have identified for them, or if the council body as a whole has a different priority from the administration, they may push for certain items.
For people who are interested in learning more and following this process, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so there's a couple different avenues. One, we do have budget hearings down at City Council. Those happen every Tuesday, Wednesday throughout the budget hearing process. Sometimes they're really exciting, other times they're maybe not the most exciting thing to come and watch. But we also have our budget town halls that the council is doing out through the community. We also, I would say, follow your council members on social media. A lot of them are very active, keeping their constituents up to date on how the budget process is going. And then we have a whole host of documents online as well to explain the budget. So those are a few of the avenues to be engaged. But yeah, that's a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
spending some
you.
time with us.
Thank you.
All right. We'd like to thank Helen Lawhead for joining us on the program. And now we'd like to bring on Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa, how are you tonight? Oh, you're muted there.
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
Good. Tell us where you were over the weekend.
So this weekend, I was at Independence Mall at National Historic Park in Philadelphia at the Hands Off protest, which was one of more than 1,300 protests organized on a national day of action across the U.S. And so at this protest, there was about 25 to 30,000 people, which is the most people I've ever seen convened in downtown Philadelphia for a protest.
All right. And you
yeah,
have some
these
video here.
Yeah, these protests were organized by several different groups nationally as part of this Indivisible movement. It's also part of the 50501 campaign. And many of these protests took place at state capitals, federal buildings, and city centers. And so that is why they marched from City Hall all the way down to National Historic Park in front of the Constitution Center, where they held a pretty large rally. So I was there and I captured some voices of people protesting to tell us why they were there. So let's take a listen. Vanessa Maria Graber, and we are here at the corner of 5th and Market Street at Independence Mall, where there is a large protest happening. There are thousands of people here who just marched all the way from City Hall to National Historic Park to protest the current policies of President Trump. We see a really diverse crowd, lots of families here, people of all ages, and we're about to dive in and check out the rally that's going on.
We're not just saying no. We're saying yes to something better. Yes to our humanity. Yes to our solidarity. Yes to our dignity. Yes to peace. Yes to our planet. Yes to a future where power flows from the people and not from billionaires.
My name is David Gibson. I live in South Philadelphia. I'm one of the two co-coordinators of Peace, Justice, Sustainability Now. We're an associate member group of Peace Action, and we're out here to build unity to fight what looks like an authoritarian coup. I mean, we don't see tanks in the streets yet, but it doesn't look good. A lot of people have been hurt, and we all are stronger together and unified, and we've got to bring people together to push back on this autocratic government, to hold the line so we can change the power of Congress in D.C. in the next 2 years.
I'm State Representative Chris Rabb. I represent the 200th Legislative District of Pennsylvania, covering 4 neighborhoods in Northwest Philly.
All right, tell us why you're out here today.
I'm always looking for good trouble, and there's 10,000 people out here who want the same. They want real change, and this is a moment where we have to stand up and realize it's up to us. It's not up to anyone else. We are the leaders we've been looking for, and I'm here to affirm all the people who are anxious, who are frustrated, who are scared, but who are also empowered to do something and not just wait for something to happen to us. I'm most concerned about the oligarchy. I'm concerned about fascism and the destruction of institutions that espouse to represent our democratic republic and the values that we, Independence Hall back here, have codified into the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And in fact, they are not stepping up. The most influential, the wealthiest institutions are not doing nearly enough. So I'm using my position in elective office to hold them account, to make sure that
He's here to talk to us about the
we realize that if we don't organize, we will be destroyed. And also that we have been through worse and come out stronger. Nothing that we care about, whether it's climate action, full and fair funding of public education, gender justice, whatever, can be actually move forward unless we address campaign finance reform and electoral reform. And also, I know something you care about is media democracy, making sure that independent voices and outlets have the resources and reach that they deserve so that we can pull ourselves away from the clutches of corporate media. Corporate media is an extension of Wall Street, and Wall Street is an extension of the corporate greed that has destroyed the fabric of our society as we know it. So people need to know that there are elected officials who are true public servants who will speak truth to power, not just at big rallies, but in terms of our legislative agenda. Anything else is just progressive cosplay, and I have no patience for that.
My name is Seth Anderson Oberman. I'm the Executive Director of Reclaim Philadelphia. I came out today to stand with the people and fight back against the fascist hijacking that is trying to take the country back from regular working people, from our communities, our cities, everybody who's fought to make this country a better place for all of us. We're having it ripped away now and sold off to billionaires. And it was really heartening to come out today and stand with, I would have to say, 25,000, 30,000 people who showed up in Philadelphia to say hell no, to say get your hands off our city, get your hands off our, all of the programs and agencies and services and things that we've won to protect working people and communities. It was really powerful, and it gives me some hope for the future. I hope people will stay active. The rallies are great sometimes when we need to show our strength and the broad support, but I hope that people will engage in their communities. I hope that they will continue to organize and talk to their neighbors, build block by block where they live. We need to build up organization and the ability for us to build networks of solidarity so that we can stand with each other against some of these attacks. I want people to run for office. We need new blood. We need people to fight for a different vision for this country. We didn't get here where we are right now overnight. It took a long time to get here, and there were a lot of compromises along the way by both parties. And we need a way forward that puts working people in the driver's seat in the center of the change that we need to win.
Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people, right on. To all our federal workers, we see your worth every day. To Musk we say hands off, your cuts are not worth the cost. And we say power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people, right on.
Now, Vanessa, I feel like a lot of us have been waiting for something like this to happen. Is this kind of a relief that we're at this point? Do we see more of these things coming? What do you think?
Well, there's been a lot of celebration to see that many people across the country attending protests, especially in small towns. So for example, there was a big turnout in Lancaster, PA. There was a big turnout in Cape May, in Trenton. And we don't normally see, people in small towns coming out to do direct actions like these. So certainly there is a lot of inspiration in that. And in what a lot of the speakers were saying at the rally, they were encouraging people to join groups, to start organizing, to get involved. And that's what it takes in order to push back and resist against Trump and Elon Musk's policies. However, there's been a lot of criticism, right, that this movement is largely driven by the traditional leaders of the Democratic Party. They're not really calling for big changes to the policies that were enacted by President Biden and presidential candidate Kamala Harris. And so people are a bit frustrated that they don't see big changes, and these are the same people that were turned off from voting for Harris. Also, even though there was a huge amount of people in Philadelphia, it was it was not a very diverse crowd. It was skewed very older. It was like a baby boomer crowd. It was very white. And you didn't see a lot of different grassroots organizations represented like we would see in like a May Day rally, where it is a coalition of labor union and interfaith groups and community organizations. So again, it's complex, right? I think it's going to take more than a very peaceful protest like that in order to defeat some of these policies. I think that some proponents would like to see things like a general strike or boycotting or, more economic disruption. And we saw the attempts to do that, a day without immigrants, for example, or people going on strike, closing their businesses, these boycotts that we've been seeing against Target and Walmart and Amazon. And so, I think people want more of that, but it's going to take some grassroots organizing in order for mass mobilizations to occur. So we'll see if this movement is sustainable. We've seen big turnouts a lot like this before, supporting Palestine, and even way before that in Philadelphia, there was a huge anti-war movement that fizzled out once Obama took office. So it's unclear how long this movement is here to stay, but certainly if people are out on the streets again, I will be there bringing you the story.
You brought up the fact that it was kind of homogenous, which is why my question is, what was the police presence like? Because I know when I've covered Black Lives Matter protests, we've had to fear as much from the police protesting for our rights as we have from the police action that brought us there in the first place. So what was the police action? What was there a police action there?
No, there wasn't. There was hardly any security, any police presence there whatsoever. Because it was on federal land, we saw park rangers, although there was only a handful of them because of the federal layoffs, right? Where normally we might see 24 park rangers protecting the property. And so I just want to paint a picture of something more recent. Of course, I've covered a lot of the protests that have happened in support of Palestine. I've been one of few journalists there on the ground. And the police presence was immense, right? And you also saw not just Philly police, but SEPTA police and Homeland Security. And it was really like an interdepartmental or intergovernmental coalition of law enforcement there. Of course, with the Black Lives Matter movement, when you're protesting police and often going to police headquarters, there is going to be a very large police presence. But like I said, more recently, at these campus student protests, in marches at City Hall and other places, promoting liberation for Palestine, it was a stark difference from what we saw yesterday. And so again, there's been a lot of criticism about, unfairly applying police force and police presence and even, violence that's often perpetuated by the police.
And by the way, because the phrase "tanks in the street" was mentioned in your piece, there's quite possibly going to be some tanks in the street because Donald Trump has decided that for his birthday, I can't believe he's only 79, I guess hate ages you, that he is not only he is going to finally have the parade of tanks going down Pennsylvania Avenue that he has wanted since his first inauguration. So we're probably going to see tanks on the street.
Yeah, that's a typical fascist move. We're going to have to leave it there. Next week on the program, Lance Haver will be on with us, and we'll have Sabrina Maynard, Philadelphia City Budget Director, to walk us through to take us, I would call it Budget 102. Helen got us started. Sabrina will take us the rest of the way. So we will be back next week on Hall Monitor.
Thanks so much for watching and listening.